Hello and welcome back to the Care Plan. I'm so glad that you've chosen to join us today. My name is Jacqueline Boyd. I'm the owner and founder, and I'm so happy to have
Jackson Stacy
here with me. In honor of Pride Month, we are mixing it up a little bit with our videos, and we're doing interviews specifically around caregiving. So Jackson, in December of last year, was gracious enough to write a blog for us about his experiences in caregiving and the importance of intergenerational connection. So that's what we're talking about today, and so glad that you're here. So Jackson, do you mind sharing a little bit about just how you got into caregiving and what it, really just that, how you got into caregiving?
Sure. So I kind of fell into caregiving in my mid-20s. I was spending a lot of time in political communities and LGBT communities, and I was kind of hungry for a bit of history, a bit of sense of where I was from and maybe what my life might look like as an older person. And so I guess I had an interest in older generations and having those connections, but it was through political community and just being around that I met friends who were older, and caregiving just naturally started becoming a part of those friendships as the need was obviously there, and I have a natural inclination that way, so it just kind of started being part of my social life.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because there's different ways to come to caregiving, you know, and I think a lot of us within LGBTQ communities in particular find each other in more informal ways. And so that's it. As somebody who became a CNA and sort of worked in nursing homes and then got to work with our elders, it's exciting to hear that your experience as sort of just naturally occurring relationships evolved is a route to go as well. Can you share a little bit about how you feel your life has been impacted by working with older adults?
Yeah, I think the two really big things that have been brought to my life through caregiving is one is just a lot of skills and a lot of knowledge about bodies and human experience and death and life and what health is. And I'm someone who it doesn't really work well in conventional learning environments, and so I think something like becoming a CNA doesn't feel like such an option to me, and just being able to learn those skills and have the trust of someone who also trusts me, because the person I'm speaking about, who I did my main care for over the years, was someone else who was trans, and the base of trust was built from that, and the skill building I was able to build those skills because someone had that trust in me, because we have this shared identity and connection. And I think the other really big thing that I've gotten out of doing intergenerational care is just a sense that although my life is very unconventional, and up until fairly recently I couldn't have really told you what an older version of me might look like through being around a lot of older trans people, which are very hidden in society, and I just didn't know what that even looked like until I started meeting older trans people. But I feel like now I have this sometimes role models and people who I can get genuine advice from, who can advise me in a way other elders in my life just don't have the insight or capacity to. And also just a vision of what an older life might look like for me, and what growing old might look like as a trans person.
That's amazing, and I just feel like that element is so special, and especially to have the experiences that you go through, that we've all gone through as LGBTQ people, to have that reflected in a future self. It's kind of amazing on the younger side of the spectrum to be able to connect with older adults and say, oh, I can see myself. And this is something that has not happened before, at least not in America. For last century, it really was, most people stayed in the closet for the better part of last century. So it's really the last few generations that are getting to enjoy this kind of connection. So for folks who may be considering caregiving, given that we're at the point where the baby boomers are aging and there's not going to be enough caregivers realistically, and I think there hasn't been really a draw for millennials to to think of caregiving as an option or something that they might want to do. So what would your advice be to people who are looking to connect with an older adult and maybe considering becoming a caregiver?
I think that the sense of a bigger context and a future that I've gotten from caregiving is something that I couldn't have found any other way, and I think that finding ways that work for you to create those connections and also being realistic about who you're going to have those connections with. Like, for me, the sustainability that I found in doing care is in doing care with people who I'm politically and otherwise aligned with, because it means that there's multiple layers of connection and there's bigger shared value systems. So I think being intentional about where you reach out and who you seek to have intergenerational connections with and why, and make sure that it's something that's feeding both of you, is a really big key to it. And I think just not being afraid to find it on your own terms, and don't feel like you have to go and get a degree or do it in any formalized way. Human connections and community building can just happen in really simple ways that can be really meaningful and impactful.
Yeah, I think that's really true. You know, there's so much that we kind of build up in our heads that keeps us from each other, you know, that nervousness about, especially for older adults, are younger people going to respond to me? Do they want to talk to me? On the younger side, do they care about me? Are they going to think I'm too young or immature or whatever? But I think you're right that the depth of our experiences and really the characteristics and qualities that we share are what draws together for a really natural caregiving relationship.
Yeah.
And you said something I thought that was interesting before we turned the camera on, about the experience that the older generations have had around HIV and AIDS, which is so different than folks that were born in the later 1980s and 1990s. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think when we talk about the reasons why intergenerational care is something that's both been in our cultures for a long time and also feels difficult to attain, is a big part of that is just the cultural gaps that happen when something like the huge trauma of AIDS, coming through communities the way that it did, and then younger generations having a vague sense of that, or the nostalgia that feeds through from that, but not really understanding what that loss and that grief was like, and then and then generations that are now on PrEP and don't have such a different connection to health and sex as a LGBTQ person. And I think those gaps make it hard for people to connect, and likewise in the trans community, the difference in experience of young trans people right now as opposed to even 5 years ago is so extreme that I think sometimes it's easy to get lost in the differences for us and to feel isolated from each other because culturally, our lives are so nuanced. But I think reaching across those gaps and finding out what you can learn from them, understanding what was it like to be you in your life can give us so much resilience and so much insight.
Absolutely. I so appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about this. I don't know about for you, but for many folks, the caregiving relationship is kind of deeply personal because it changes you in many ways, in ways that are unexpected and beautiful. So if you're considering being a caregiver or thinking about just spending time with an older adult, please know that it's a worthwhile endeavor, and we strongly encourage you to have some of the experiences that we've been able to have, learning from the generations that have come before. So thank you for joining us. Stay tuned, and we will see you soon. Take good care.
Take good care.